When Mark was hiking, he spotted a dark-colored cobra. Trying to go back, he felt a deep fear when the serpent lifted its head and stared intently at him. Momentarily frozen, a flurry of questions rushed through his mind. Mark knew there weren't any snakes living wildly in this area. This one must have strayed off. The cobra started swaying toward him, and Mark was dumbfounded. He noticed that the snake looked incredibly frail. Perhaps it needed assistance? Shocked at the cobra's unexpected approach, he tried to retreat. Mark wasn't sure what exactly the cobra wanted, but he didn't want to gamble being injured. Even though he felt this animal might require aid, his survival instincts told him to hide first. Concealed from the cobra's sight, he noticed the snake's sheer weakness and an unusual lump. This couldn't be a good sign. Mark emerged from his hiding place only to find the cobra closing in on him aggressively. Paralyzed in fear, it took him a few seconds to gather his wits. He instantly knew he was in a predicament when he tripped over a branch. Surprisingly, the snake didn't attack him. Instead, it wrapped itself around his ankle, staring at him with tiny eyes. Stunned by this interaction, Mark stood still, observing as the snake flicked its tongue in and out of its mouth. The snake then lifted its head and emitted a soft hiss. This startled Mark, but he quickly understood that the snake was attempting to communicate, yet he had no clue about the cobra's message. He hesitated, aware of this cobra's notorious venomous nature. Mark then noticed the snake's loss of energy. It was at the point of exhaustion. Recalling his initial observations, something clicked in his mind. The mysterious bulge on the snake's belly could be the reason behind its weakness. He knew this didn't bode well. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Mark couldn't leave the cobra stranded. He resolved to contact a veterinarian, hoping they would have the required expertise to provide guidance. The vet, initially confused and suspecting a prank, finally managed to instruct Mark to touch the bump, a step that didn't seem right. Mark tentatively tried stroking the serpent, but almost collapsed when it began hissing very loudly. The snake became quite hostile towards Mark, who had to remain calm despite hurting the snake by touching a large lump on it. The veterinarian encouraged Mark to stay calm, but the snake appeared angry. If Mark made any sudden move, the likelihood of getting bitten was very high. The vet then asked Mark to describe the snake. As Mark revealed it to be a black snake, an eerie silence ensued. The vet was taken aback by Mark's description, as he knew that this snake's bite could be lethal. He expressed worry for both Mark and the snake. Mark was tasked with remaining composed, yet the snake also needed immediate care and had to be captured. The snake's distress escalated. It continued to hiss as if it was in pain. The vet knew the situation called for his presence in the woods, since there was no possibility of Mark capturing and caring for the snake safely. He advised Mark to offer the snake a small amount of water to soothe it. When Mark fetched his water, the snake tracked his every move. Soon, Mark noticed the snake appeared increasingly weakened. When he filled a glass with water, the snake lunged forward eagerly and started drinking. It seemed to bring the creature some relief, which in turn eased Mark's fears. The snake also began to lessen its tight hold on Mark. Nevertheless, the snake's situation remained critical. Mark continuously insisted for the vet to attend to it, as they couldn't afford any delay. But there was a significant issue that was hard to overlook. Mark was located deep within the forest, and the vet was at a considerable distance. His attempts to reach Mark with the necessary supplies became complicated. Furthermore, specific means of transport to navigate the forest was a requirement. The only choice left was to wait. The vet assured Mark of his arrival. Mark suggested an ally of his had a truck suitable for rough terrains. This seemed to be an ideal solution. The vet immediately set off to the provided address to ensure his presence to assist. Then something took the snake by surprise. It began slithering away autonomously. Mark was flabbergasted. It appeared as if the snake was drawn towards something. He couldn't just sit by and let the snake perish. So he made up his mind to follow the snake to its intended destination. The reptile wasn't incredibly swift, and the large lump further impeded the snake's speed. Thanks to this, Mark could keep track of the snake without difficulty. He wasn't certain where the snake was heading, but his surprise was palpable when he found out. It turned out the snake had fashioned a nest within an old tree. Mark was completely astounded, with no clue about what he was witnessing. Yet when he attempted to get closer, the snake became very aggressive. Mark had to tread carefully. In the meantime, the veterinary professional made a call to law enforcement because of a dangerously loose snake. It was necessary to ensure the surrounding area was safe and that the snake couldn't go anywhere by the time the vet arrived. The entire narrative startled the police, but they immediately sprang into action. They treated it with utmost seriousness, recognizing that if the black cobra made it out of the woods and into the city, people could get injured. They couldn't risk such a scenario. The police took necessary steps to get in touch with animal control services. Both forces would join together to ensure the snake was returned to its natural habitat. They were still clueless about how it ended up in the forest, but it must have originated from somewhere. Mark attempted to approach the nest from different angles, but the snake kept up its defensive stance. It seemed there was something in the nest worth protecting. Mark was thoroughly convinced of this. Eventually, on his last attempt, the snake surrendered, seemingly so weakened that it looked nearly lifeless to Mark. Upon a closer inspection, he observed the snake lying on something in the nest. He knew he would have to await professional help to figure out what it could be. Having been informed that the vet would arrive in an hour, Mark had concerns that the snake might not survive. The vet did everything possible to get there on time. Thankfully, Mark heard something approaching in the distance. Recognizing the sound of sirens, Mark was relieved. The police and animal control were already on their way to the site. While they couldn't do much for the snake right away, they could ensure its safety until the vet's arrival, which could happen at any moment. Officer David met with Mark, thanking him for the information provided. He also informed Mark of the need to isolate the area due to the potential danger the animal posed. This took Mark by surprise, and he was informed he couldn't stay. Despite his attempts to resist, the efforts proved ineffective. David informed Mark that if he didn't vacate the area, they'd be compelled to take him into custody. David reassured Mark that they would keep him updated about the snake and its status. Mark reluctantly backed away. From the direction of the snake's nest, Mark suddenly heard cries. The animal control team was attempting to secure the snake, encountering resistance from it. Various officers were pitching in, trying to help. Mark understood that only a professional vet should approach this particular creature. A mishap followed. One officer was bitten by the snake when he came too close. The scream that followed was filled with agony, a pain he had never experienced before. He was instantly taken back to a police car for a quick trip to the hospital. Officer David's instinct was to strike back. He moved toward the snake, only to be restrained by his fellow officers. David wanted to euthanize the snake, but information from animal control mentioned that it was a no-go as the snake was under protection. But David didn't secede. As David was preparing to fire at the cobra, a strong voice ordered him to drop his gun. Mark, hearing the commotion, disregarded the quarantine lines. David quickly cautioned him to retreat or face arrest, but the arrival of the vet was timely. Trying to reach the snake rapidly, the vet requested David to back off and asked Mark to stay near. With cautious steps, the vet tried approaching the snake. But the snake was not willing to accept any intrusion. The snake persisted in guarding its nest, irritated by the chaos. The vet concluded that a sedative was the only chance. He darted a tranquilizer into the snake, but the terror struck when the snake showed no sign of sedation. This tranquilizer was the only one he had. Now what? Another member of the animal control team ran over to the vet. They had found some potent tranquilizers strong enough to down an elephant. The vet, overwhelmed with relief, could now safely sedate the snake. After waiting for approximately 10 minutes, the snake was finally sedated. The vet could now get near the snake. A thorough inspection proved the snake was so heavy that the vet couldn't lift it alone. He was still unsure of what the snake was safeguarding. The most critical concern, though, was the massive lump in the snake's body. The bulge indicated that something was lodged within the snake. It was clear to the vet that the black cobra required a surgical procedure. One problem arose. He didn't have the necessary equipment to perform an on-the-spot surgery. The snake had to be taken to the city. With the help of all the helpers present, including Mark, they managed to lift the snake from its nest and put it into one of the largest vehicles available. They had to rapidly relocate the serpent before it regained consciousness, because they were out of soothing agents. Mark spotted something else. Beneath the snake were a few eggs that it was safeguarding. He decided to grab these eggs too, as it would somewhat pacify the snake if it gained consciousness. It was imperative to keep the eggs warm. The animal doctor directed the driver to his intended destination. Concurrently, the officers aided in transferring the snake and accompanying the vehicle. They summoned additional troops to clear the roadway ahead for an unhindered passage through the city. Onlookers were utterly bewildered observing what was transpiring. They reached within 60 minutes, but right when they wanted to move the snake inside, it startled awake. Everyone hastily evacuated the vehicle. Yvette darted inside to procure more of the soothing agents. Fortunately, she had enough, and they could relocate the snake inside. Yvette immediately began operating on the enormous serpent, but before she could get to the substantial bump, she noticed something else. Unable to discern what it was, she had to go a bit deeper into the flesh, but it emitted a worrisome aura. Eventually, with a little help from his assistant, she extracted something. Lark was observing from the window and was unable to understand what it might be. Suddenly, one of the nearby officers took a sharp intake of breath. He had figured out what it was. There was a tracking device planted deep within the snake's hide. It was vital to secure this device immediately. This could potentially lead them to the solutions they were seeking. This was undeniably going to reveal who was accountable for liberating the snake. The chip was handed over to a special investigator at the police, who quickly decoded it. The investigation led them to a forsaken warehouse at the waterfront docks, where they apprehended a snake trafficker who confessed to the sinister act without reluctance. The snake had managed to escape during a recent merchandising. Yvette also discovered the cause of the sizable bump. It was an egg that was unsuccessfully trying to make its way out of the snake's body. Amazingly enough, they managed to retrieve the chip, capture a trafficker, and a snake was rescued. It was a relief to know that the snake quickly recovered to health and the eggs were safe. The snake was relocated to a local zoological park where it would receive the appropriate care and the eggs would have a secure environment to hatch. Lark frequently stopped by the zoo to check on the snake's well-being. He held a strong sense of accomplishment for his efforts toward the snake's rescue.